Welcome everyone to the third day of the MISTech Conference 2020. We have Hugh Lovel. Hugh is passionate about understanding how nature works and how technology can help us in this quest. Believing that study of self is the key to further investigation, he first studied educative psychology, which, using biofeedback, draws out the factors that hold stress in place. Then his first encounters with biodynamics fascinated him, leading him to more than 40 years of biodynamic study and practice. Hugh currently works as an international consultant to all types of farm endeavors and has taught in India, Japan, South Africa, Namibia, Australia, New Zealand, Norway, Netherlands, Ireland, England, Scotland, Canada, Mexico, and the US. As a holistic scientist, he is pioneering the new field of quantum agriculture, where holography, resonance, non-locality, entanglement, coherence, and syntropy supersede agriculture's old war on nature playbook. Hugh is the author of Biodynamic Farm for Growing Wholesome Food and Quantum Agriculture, Biodynamics and Beyond, both of which you can find in the recommended book section just below your screen here and on RSBS, RudolfSteinerBookstore.com. He designed and sells stationary, self-driven induction field devices called field broadcasters that set up the background patterns for biodynamic farm organisms, and quantum radionic instruments that can transfer patterns radionically to any location, either on the farm or elsewhere. His articles appear in Acres USA, in related farming periodicals such as Biodynamics, Acres Australia, and other biodynamic journals around the world. Initially, Hugh gained 30 years of broad experience in biodynamic farming while operating a market garden farm and the first CSA in Georgia. His farm was home to the annual Southeast Biodynamic Conferences for 12 years. Hugh migrated to Australia in 2005 to teach, consult, and write. Hugh served for 6 years on the National Board of Biodynamic Agriculture, Australia. He and his wife, Shabre Bird, are the founders of Quantum Agriculture Consultancy and currently live in the southern Appalachian Mountains of North Georgia. Welcome, Hugh. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate this opportunity to put these ideas forward. I'm going to show a presentation here that I hope introduces my subject, and then we can have questions and answers afterwards. So without further ado, let me share screen with my presentation. Okay, the title of my presentation here is Radionics and Biodynamics. And so I'll just continue on with this and see where we get to. Radionics works with what have been called subtle energies and subtle energy patterns. But what are these subtle energies? These are the wave side of nature. Now, quantum physics deals with the holographic universe, which in my language is both spiritual and physical. This word spiritual oftentimes acts as a roadblock to communication with conventional scientists. But in quantum physics, there's an understanding that both the wave, which is a pattern of activity that is non-local, or what I call spiritual, and it affects any particles it is entangled with. But the particle side of nature is at rest and is physically anchored in a locality. It could be doing anything, or it could be doing nothing. It's the wave that is the doing part of nature. So to delve a little deeper into this, there are certain eternal truths that we find in physics. And one of them is seek and you will find. When you look for the wave side of nature, you can find its pattern, but you don't know its location because it is non-local. But if you look for the particle side of nature, then you find its location, and then you have no idea what its pattern is because you're not looking at what it's doing. Now, this comes straight out of the Sermon on the Mount, so this is not anything new, that seek and you will find, and ask and it will be given, and knock and the door will open. To this I have added, where the attention goes, the energy flows. And there is a caveat to this. Prejudice is anathema to truth. If you have a preconceived idea, it will get in the way. The skeptic then wants to see, but he seeks the truth without prejudice, and thus he finds the truth. The cynic, on the other hand, who often poses as a skeptic, already has his mind made up. He too finds what he looks for, but what he is looking for is not the truth. Now, dowsing comes into this because we're dealing with things that are invisible. So when we take a snapshot of something, we see it in its non-active stage. We might see hints of its activity, but we're only taking one moment in time. So we don't see the continuity of activity. And so to look at these things that are invisible, one of the common tools that is used is dowsing. And these are a couple of books: Dowsing, A Path to Enlightenment by Joey Korn, and The Divining Hand, written by Christopher Bird, who was my wife's late husband and next door neighbor for some time. So these are like good background books in learning about dowsing. The human nervous system has somewhere in the vicinity of 23,250 miles of nerve fiber, yielding an antenna wavelength in the vicinity of 7.8 hertz. So we're really complex in terms of our antenna capabilities. So we can tune into any of the information that is available at those wavelengths. So to understand how dowsing works, then that's one of the aspects. But one of the things that I learned in working with biofeedback in educative psychology is that the subconscious mind is enormous. Back 2,500 years ago, the Buddha taught that there are 17 trillion thought events per second. And our biofeedback research confirmed that. So each moment of thought is extremely complex, and we can't put our finger on details, so we can ask questions, but we can't pin it down very easily without some sort of focusing devices, which is what dowsing is all about. So it helps us to pick out information from our subconscious. And these are some dowsing tools: L rods, pendulums, bobbers, and so forth. This is a dowsing fan chart so that you can get a variety of answers by swinging your pendulum. You drive your pendulum and you see which angle it is attracted to, and you look at that angle for your answer. So you can dowse here on, say, this line and see what's on that line. And you can ask different kinds of questions. And these are homeopathic potencies. letters of the alphabet times, like seconds, minutes, and hours. I oftentimes use this outer scale for percentages. So I can ask a question such as, I'm dealing with an upset, and how much of this is yours and how much of this is someone else's? So I might get 50% of it is mine and 50% is some other person's or persons. So I can actually ask for detailed information using this fan chart. I can ask for colors. I can ask for the biodynamic preparations that are appropriate to any given situation. And I can put the witness of what I'm asking about in this center, or put this fan chart on top of it, and then ask my questions. This is a common assay that I use to find out information that it would cost me thousands of dollars if I were to send it to the lab to find this information. And although the accuracy of this is subject to my own internal prejudices, nonetheless, this gives me a sort of a seat of the pants working picture of what's going on in any given farm soil. This iris here is actually a device that concentrates the light ether, and it's oftentimes used in paper radionics, because I can put the witness on top of this circle, and in between the witness and this iris, I can put whatever patterns that I want to project. And so I use this as a projection wheel. This is the cheapest of radionic devices because I can just print it off on my printer. The witness is another part of this picture, and this is a Google map with its boundaries drawn around it of our farm here in North Georgia. So anything I want to do to this picture is done to the actual farm because of quantum entanglement. And because it is bounded, then it contains the energy pattern that I project to it. And in this process, I use an intent. And I'll read this off here. If it be thy will, let the powers of nature converge to increase and enhance beneficial energies and transform any detrimental energies into beneficial ones within the boundaries as marked for now and in the future, for as long as is appropriate. Amen. So with that intent, then I'm projecting this pattern of activity or energy onto the farm. I can project any of my biodynamic preparations in this fashion from my office or from my kitchen table. So that makes the application of biodynamic preparations quite a bit simpler. Now, these are radionic instruments. This is a Kelly instrument. This is the type, this double dial type is a variable capacitance instrument. All of these instruments work on resistance. So these are resistors of a certain type. So this also here in this picture is a phase array antenna, and it's what is used to project the energy. This picture here is one of the quantum instruments. This is my design, and it can use cards to project the patterns. So this one here has a shock resistant case. It has an internal timer. It has 4 different wells for different patterns that I want to project on the map, which would be put in the output well. And it's got a phase It can either shift the pattern 180 degrees out of phase, or it can project the pattern in phase. If you want to eliminate a certain type of activity that's going on, then you can project it 180 degrees out of phase, and it acts as a homeopathic medicine. And you can pulse this either rapidly or slowly or intermediate in order to, each time it goes on and off, is a new treatment. So instead of having the butterfly effect as though it is just one butterfly, you have the effect of having whole swarms of butterflies. And the start button here turns it on, and the timer turns it off. So that for a farmer who is setting up his treatments before breakfast and before supper, then he can set this up and go about his other business, and the instrument will turn itself off at the appropriate time. So this just gives you a closer look here at one of these pattern cards. This card here that has these sector marks in these various angular locations is the pattern of this preparation, the BD 501. And to review here a little bit, quantum non-locality, entanglement, and the science of intent. Seek and you will find, ask and you will receive, knock and the door will open. If you don't seek, you won't find. And when you don't ask, you will not receive. And if you don't knock, the door will not open. So be clear what you ask for. Be aware you involuntarily look for both your hopes and your fears. So you have to put both of these aside insofar as possible. Unwavering intent is a result of focus, and this is what makes a radionic instrument so helpful, is you're writing down an intent and you create a stable thought form, thus, so you can focus on this. And your prayer of intent is something very important. And I think those of you who review this prayer of intent will find it is very well thought out and covers all the bases. There is also computer radionics programs, and this is just an example, just to mention that the computer, by shifting a few electrons, is actually creating a very minute effect. But in fluid dynamics and in quantum physics and chaos theory, then it has been found that a microscopic change at a point can affect large-scale changes in the medium. So even though you're doing something that is just shifting a few electrons, then that is sufficient to have downstream a large-scale effect. So basically, that's the tools that I'm using in quantum agriculture. I'm using radionics, I'm using field broadcasting, which I will mention a little later. But if I don't know how to use it, then I'm just like a monkey in an arsenal. And I could be creating havoc because I don't know what I'm doing. So biodynamic agriculture is something that you have to understand in order to know what to do and how to do it. So biodynamic agriculture is in the process of inventing a new agriculture that knows how nature works. We have had an agriculture that is at war with nature, and it's not working well. And it's producing questionable products that don't have integrity and don't have nourishment. So let's look at biodynamics. We're looking at something here. This is a diagram of Glenn Atkinson's periodic table. So it shows all of the different elements in the periodic table along with what they're significant for. So the yellow here is the physical elements. The green is the etheric elements. The blue is the astral elements. And the purple are the egoic elements. And so we've got that fourfold story of the physical, the etheric, the astral, and the egoic. But this is a 3D periodic table, and it's a matter of patterns, because each of these elements conforms to a pattern, and it's a 6-dimensional pattern. So let's look into this a little further. We're all familiar with the customary periodic table, and hydrogen and helium are the spiritual elements. And then the first octave here with lithium, beryllium, boron, carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, fluorine, and neon, these are the chemical elements. They're 2-dimensional elements. Then we come to the physical elements, and they're 3-dimensional, and that's sodium, magnesium, aluminum, silicon, phosphorus, sulfur, chloride, and argon. And then the next octave is the etheric elements, and we don't have life processes until we have these transition metals that serve as catalysts for enzyme functions. But the etheric elements are only 4-dimensional. So to enfold the first 4 dimensions so that we have an internal experience of the outer universe, then we get astrality, which is 5-dimensional elements. And in this astrality, then we find such elements as iodine and molybdenum, which are important for the astrality. Iodine is essential for the immune functions of animals. Plants don't need it. But then we come to the last octave of the stable elements here, and we find such elements as mercury and lead and gold and iridium. So these are elements that are important to human beings because of our egoic construction. They're of no, like mercury doesn't poison shrimp because they don't have an egoic body to be disturbed by too much mercury. Mercury, on the other hand, is an essential element. We just don't need very much of it at any one time. So that's a way of looking at it. The biochemical sequence, however, which is something that I have pioneered, starts off with boron being essential for silica to work in drawing the nutrients up in the transport system of the plant. And the first nutrient that it draws up would be calcium, and calcium ties into nitrogen. Nitrogen is essential for the making of chlorophyll, which is the most important protein in the plant's chemistry. And then the energy that's caught by the chlorophyll has to go by way of phosphorus into catching carbon and turning it into sugar, which goes wherever the potassium goes. So that sequence tells us that we need to make sure that the boron is working so the silicon works. Because if the silicon doesn't work, then the calcium doesn't work properly, nor does the nitrogen or the magnesium, phosphorus, and so forth. So we're putting on fertilizers of N, P, and K, which are way down here in the sequence to number 4, number 6, and number 8. And we've been putting these fertilizers on soils for 100 years, and they have gotten less and less fertile. And it's really no wonder. In biodynamics, we're working with the 4 elements of Greek philosophy: fire, water, air, and earth. And these 4 elements have associated with them what we call the ethers, or the activities that are associated with fire, has the activity of warmth. Warmth is what brings fire into existence. With light, and you see flowering here, this is a function of the light ether, and it's working with the air element. Then tone is working with the water element, and life, finally, working with carbon, is what is essential for living organisms to have their activity as living organisms. So we also are dealing with the astrality. We just dealt with the ethericity, but the astrality is dependent on these planetary bodies in our solar system. And these planetary bodies are the channels for the energy of the universe to come into our awareness. And so we have the inner planets here and we have the outer planets. And there's a difference in what they're associated with. We've got it raining out here, and you may be hearing that rain. But the inner planets are dealing with the vigor of plants, and the outer planets are dealing with the nutrition that we get from plants. So this is another level of what's going on in biodynamics. But last of all, we have the 12-fold constellations of the zodiac, which is the animal circle. And these constellations are what informs the plants of various natures and the animals of various natures and so on and so forth. That sense of identity and individuality that is self-aware in human beings. And it's this self-awareness that leads to our evolution, because we're always striving as human beings to become more than what we already are. And so this really is dealing with, biodynamics is dealing with all these levels of human experience. So to move along even further, biodynamics is using certain preparations, and these preparations are like magic potions, you might say. Magic, of course, is science that we don't understand yet. But these preparations are at the heart of biodynamic practice, so let's look at them. The first one is the horn manure. We take cow manure and fill cow horns with it and bury them in the earth over the winter season, from the autumnal equinox to somewhat past the spring equinox. And this preparation has a lot to do with the humus and the carbon and nitrogen activity in the soil. So this preparation is the first preparation used in biodynamic agriculture. And so it's kind of famous, and it's oftentimes ridiculed by people who don't understand it, because what do you expect to do with stuffing a cow's horn with manure and burying it for 6 months and then digging it up and taking a sort of a level handful, stirring it up in water and spraying it over an acre of ground, and you expect something to happen from that? What? We're living in a culture that believes in bigger hammers and longer levers. And how can we expect something like this preparation that we use like just an ounce or so and spray it on an acre, and we expect something really profound to happen? We expect the humus in the soil to burgeon into a dynamic vitality. What? But we're not looking at this in the right way, because physics in our present world is enamored with the idea of entropy. And we believe firmly in entropy. Everything is running down and losing its organization and descending into chaos. But entropy cannot possibly be just a one-way street. What we have missed in physics over the last several centuries is the idea of polarity. If we have one sort of thing like gravity, don't we have to have its opposite, like levity? And we see this back in the winter of 1999 and 2000. The Hubble telescope found that the most distant objects in our universe are receding away from us. They're expanding. The universe is expanding fastest at its edges. It's accelerating out there on the outermost edge of the universe. So there is a form of levity in the universe. The universe is growing. And of course, we see this in living organisms. When we were in the womb as a zygote, didn't we grow? So we've actually built this organization into our being. We look at nature and we see all the living things in nature, and we somehow or another miss it, that there is organizational energy as well as disorganizational energy, and thus there is syntropy as well as entropy. And what we're putting out here in this preparation is something that has resonated in this horn. Hold it up and listen. And it's resonating for 6 months down there in the earth and picking up the vibrations of everything that's going on within the earth. And that's highly organizational. And it is so organized that it draws more organization to itself. So this little bit of preparation that we put out there draws more organization into the area that we put it on. And yes, it does. It does something very profound. Here is the sister preparation that goes in the other direction. This is the one that's dealing with levity instead of gravity. It's dealing with warmth and light. And in the winter, warmth and light recede into the soil, and the soil is actually warmer down within the soil in the winter than it is in summer. And this preparation then should be sprayed on the soil in the winter along with the horn manure, but it needs to be sprayed in the atmosphere in the summer in the canopy of growing plants in order to draw the plants upward out of the ground. And it draws them to their maturity. So it's important in spraying beans, for example, if you want to get more and better quality beans. So it brings the plant towards its maturity. It's drawing it towards its maturity. And then in between there, we have clay. And clay is actually not just clay. Clay is very attractive to the humus, and it forms clay-humus complexes. The humus, you might say, pastes itself on to the clay molecules. And so when we're putting this out, I like to refine the clay out of my most fertile soils. So I'll take a bucket full of soil and mix it up with a paint stirrer and water, and then filter out all the coarser material and end up filtering it all through a paint sock and letting the residues settle, and that will be the clay humus complex. And you put this in a cow's horn and bury it for a whole year so that it gets both the summer and the winter influences. And this really is the missing biodynamic preparation. Steiner said in his agriculture course that later he would give recommendations of what to do with clay, and then later he forgot. So this didn't get done, you might say, when Steiner gave his agriculture course. So in biodynamics, one of the principles that's going on is Steiner said we have to work with these things and find out how to use them. And biodynamics needs to be more than just a repetition of what Steiner said. So we've had to experiment and develop further preparations, such as the horn clay. Now, the yarrow preparation is extremely astral, and you see this in the fine, like divisions here in the leaf, so that it's reaching out to the widest expanses of the universe, and it's a preparation that connects the plants with their astrality. The chamomile, on the other hand, is working with the digestive activity, and it's working with the planet Mercury, and it's working with the life ether. And it works particularly with getting nitrogen into the plant in its amino acid living form, and that is of extreme importance. And then the nettle. The nettle is working in between the astrality of the yarrow preparation and the ethericity, the life ether of the chamomile preparation. And there's debate about whether to assign this to the sun or to Mars. And nonetheless, this is a very important preparation. I use it all the time with a lot of things. I have this one planted around my field broadcaster, which is something we'll mention. Then the oak bark preparation keeps nitrogen in its living form as amino acids rather than its oxidized form as nitrate. And the dandelion preparation is especially beneficial for fruiting, for the pollination of flowers and the development of fruit. And then this preparation, the valerian preparation, is dealing mostly with the phosphorus process that occurs in flowering. And then one final preparation here, the horsetail preparation. I use this all the time in my garden, and it really keeps the plants in their vegetative form. It keeps them whole and without like either mechanical damage or fungal disease. And it tends to protect against the digestion of insect and animal pests. So here is a picture of a field broadcaster. And it works because the induction coil up here, which broadcasts through the atmosphere and sets up a field, and the one down here in the soil are alternating. This one's working in the daytime and that one's working at night. And I've gone and clicked to the next slide. This will be the last slide. I am in my garden here in Southern Appalachia. I'm growing our own fertility. And this corn plant is how I'm doing it with the help of the biodynamic preparations. Then I'm getting nature to provide the nitrogen out of the atmosphere. And this is growing this especially dynamic, hungry plant that makes so much biomass. And so it's like investing the garden in living biological activity. So we're growing ourselves into fertility. This is in the third year of a new garden here in North Georgia. And with that, that's the end of my presentation. And so we can have questions.
I do have a question about radionics. How does one get the pattern, radionic pattern off of a preparation?
Well, there's two ways. You could put it in the well and the coil picks up the vibratory pattern automatically. And so you get the pattern that way. But with my radionic instruments, And especially for scientific research purposes, you want to be sure that you've got the same pattern every time. So I've got the pattern on these cards, and it's actually, you might say it's somewhat simplified. It doesn't have all of the like side noise, because somebody burying 500 in their cow horns in New Zealand and doing it at a different time of year and using different cow manure and different horns and so on and so forth, you can't guarantee that the preparation pattern is identical with someone else. So with a card, then you've got a pattern that is sort of like simplified and uniform.
So the pattern is, I know you have cards that have patterns on them.
Yeah.
Yeah, where do those patterns come from?
They were derived from dowsing, either by the magnetogeometric application folks in London, England, or in this case by myself. And I've got a pretty strong procedure for doing that dowsing.
Gotcha. So the patterns are created from the dowsing.
Yeah, it's done with dowsing, and that's why I talked about dowsing it initially, is because we have to have some way of working with these unseen forces, and we're sensitive to them in the subconscious realm, but we're not consciously aware of them. Our five senses don't get us there. We have to use additional senses.
So I know we're running out of time with questions. The first one is your broadcast tech in the tradition of Malcolm Ray?
The card instrument is a Malcolm Ray type instrument. The Kelly research technology instrument that I showed just before that is the Hieronymus type. And Galen Hieronymus had a patent on that particular type of instrument, and it's used widely here in the US. But overseas, the Malcolm Ray type instrument is more common.
Here's another one for you.
Okay.
When using equestium to discourage fungal activity, is this applied after infestation or as a preventative?
I use it prophylactically, so I prevent. It's not a fungicide. It doesn't kill the fungi. It just strengthens the plant to be resistant to the fungi. It's a really high silica plant. If you burnt it to ash, the ash would be about 90% silica. And it's silica that forms the cell walls and connective tissues of plants. So it helps plants to be more upright. It sort of like brings them in and tightens them up and makes their cell walls stronger. And fungus just doesn't have a chance. Fungus is there to eat up weak plants.
Oh, here's one. Do you talk to elemental beings?
I don't, but I'm aware that elemental beings exist. And even though I don't talk to them, I know that my biodynamic preparations really communicate to them. So, in a certain sense, you might say that I talk to them.
Yeah.
I'm like feeding them something which they can't get otherwise, and they just really love it. It's like candy.
Yeah. It's like putting out a little bowl of porridge.
Yeah, it's like putting a saucer of milk out overnight for the elves or something. It's just,
they don't eat it, but they appreciate it.
Oh, they surely do.
Yeah.
and then they work, and they're paying attention to your intention, which is what I stated there as that intent prayer, if it be thy will.
So so let me just I'm not going to be able to get to all of these, but there is one. How does one's ego function work with dowsing?
Okay. Well, you can let your you can let your hopes and fears get in the way of dowsing, because you will find what you either hope for or what you fear with your dowsing, and uh, you have to be focused on setting all of that aside. Sometimes when you're dowsing, it's like it's not a good idea to try to douse love life because you're too attached to it. So is she going to come back to me? Yeah, if you don't quit pestering her, she's going to come back and blip you on the head. Uh, but it's not what you really meant, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
You get the wrong answer. You'll interpret it the wrong way.
So you really have to be blank.
You have to be unattached.
Yeah, very very
right.
centered, calm, clear-minded.
I lost my hammer on a construction site building bridges down in Atlanta. And I was sure it was buried somewhere in the rubble. But where? So I got my coat hanger wires out of my toolbox and I said, show me the direction to go in to find my hammer. So I watched and the rods turned and I followed them. And as I crossed over the spot, they gave me this, indication. And so I dug right there and found my hammer. But I would have been lost and would not have found my hammer any other way.
So, and that gets back to the intention.
Yeah, it's intention.
Right.
You have to have a clear intention.
So this gets back to drawing out the boundaries for which you want to cover radionically. That right there is your intention, is the boundaries.
Yeah, that is really, really important, because without those boundaries, your energy just travels away. It just radiates away
on the quantum level.
And so you don't get that clarity of intention. You have to have a well-defined intention. And it's oftentimes a really good idea to write down your intention. But on the construction side, I didn't have to write that down. My intention was clear. Show me how to find, where to go to find my hammer.
Right. And
I've found a bunch of lost objects that way, but don't expect it to show you buried treasure.
Isn't that an intention?
Yeah, it is, but it's kind of like it's a selfish intention.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily in keeping with the variety of other things going on around you.
Right. So just along that thought, the intention with the radionic device, you have wells, and in those wells you put what?
I would put the pattern, like for instance, if I was we made up a treatment for a cow that she had the staggers and she looked like she wasn't going to live much longer. And we did a bunch of dowsing and found out that she had eaten hemlock on the laneway in the dairy. And so she was getting paralyzed from eating the same kind of plant that Socrates took a drink of in order to exit his lifetime. So what we did was a program to build this cow back. It was a surprise to see the cow standing up and actually eating the next day. But we had a very complex program of different herbs, Australian flower essences, vitamins, all kinds of different things that we gave the cow the patterns of. and the cow did the rest.
So yeah,
So we actually saved this cow, which in American dollar terms is worth about $1,800.
yeah.
You know,
So
the instrument itself costs $3,000, but man, a couple cows like that, and you've paid for your instrument.
yeah, so the difficulty is for, I think for some people, is you've got these wells in your device. What is it that you put inside?
I put in the wells, I put in different cards. Like for instance, one of the cards we used was Cowpat Pit.
So the card with that pattern that you showed.
Yeah,
So
with the
you kind of
pattern.
roll it up and you stick it
Yeah,
inside, or
we also put in different minerals. I think we used a color. I forget which color we used. I've got a card for colors. Uh, I've got
so it's on a paper and you roll it up and you stick it in. The
It's got a card slot in the instrument. So
oh,
the card goes in its own slot for each well. I got 4 card slots.
oh,
And
okay.
then we took from the cow, we took a swab off of its muzzle and used that in the witness well so that it connected with the cow. So the patterns went to that cow. We could have used a picture of the cow if we'd had that picture, but it was more convenient to get a swab of her, her mucus and put that in the well.
Oh, so you can put actual items in the well that.
Yeah, a specimen of the cow. So that we had something that was genetically linked with the cow.
So there's how many wells?
There's 4 like reagent wells and 1 witness well.
Ah, gotcha.
So
Gotcha.
they're not the same.
Yeah.
One is the output, the others are input.
Okay. So I think that was a missing part of the description, was what each well has a purpose.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And you can
Okay.
set the different homeopathic potencies for each well individually.
Gotcha. Okay.
So if you're using 30C or 1M or whatever, you can set that potency for that well.
And is this described in your quantum agriculture book?
Uh, very minimally. If
Okay.
we sell an instrument to somebody, then we have to teach them how to use it.
Okay. So where can one go to find more information on how your device works?
Well, we do have like a mechanical manual of how to operate it, to turn the switches on and off and whatnot.
Do you have a training session that one could go to learn more about?
Yeah, I've tried to have training sessions with people who buy instruments. Some of them are practitioners who already know a lot about this. So it's not something that's uniform or anything, but yes, we do. And we will be having webinars on these subjects.
Great. We'd love
So
to
we
have
don't
you.
really have a manual that tells you how to. I've worked on this, but you have to understand what these different preparations do and when to use them and so on and so forth. And it's a
So
lot more
there's
complex
so
than.
there's some training involved,
Yeah, there would
before
be
you should use
training.
these things.
You
Yeah.
learn as you go, of course.
Here's one, and we just have a few more minutes before we have to end. But would it be right to broadcast the preparations to areas of the Earth that are having particular difficulties?
You could. Now, it's a big thing to take responsibility for, say, something like the weather. And I do use this instrument in ameliorating the weather, like droughts and floods and things like that, to sort of moderate the weather. And the biodynamic preparations are very useful in this regard because they're really working with those etheric and astral activities. But it's a big responsibility to take responsibility for the weather of a given region. So I don't go out and make it rain in Arizona or anything like that. I'm very reserved about altering the weather. Now, I did that here on our place back. We were having rain, and I dried it up using the Radionics and using the biodynamic preparations. And then we went into a period where we weren't getting rain. And I thought, oh, well, maybe I ought to correct that. And I tried to do it, but Mercury was retrograde and it didn't work. And I've never succeeded in changing the weather when Mercury was retrograde. So I tried real hard and then woke up to the fact that I wasn't having the desired effect. Well, my experience with this is I am having an effect, but I'm not seeing it until Mercury goes direct. So Mercury went direct and we still had dry weather. And then I had to get onto it and alter the pattern back so that we started to get rain again. And right now we're getting ample rainfall. So our period of drought, where we had like over a month without any rain, that's over with. And I don't want to tamper with it anymore.
Yeah.
So even though we're getting a little bit too much rain, I kind of look at it this way. It has to fall somewhere, and there's more evaporation off the ocean these days than there ever has been. And some of it's falling here. And so I'm just going to accept that. I'm not going to fiddle with the weather too much.
Yeah. Okay. So, of course, radionics is used in the healthcare application and other things. And that's been happening for decades now. That radionics has been used for one's health.
Right. But it's so useful in agriculture, it isn't even funny.
Yeah. And this is for another time, but I look at radionics as a potential for protecting oneself if we can somehow figure out a pattern for the protection of ourselves, and would that protect us from the EMF and all the radio frequencies and microwaves and stuff. But that's just the question I have. But we do have to end right now.
Well, there's a wide open opportunity for research.
Yes. And I hope that we continue with that research, and we do want you back as much as you can afford to be here with us at a later time. But
Okay.
for now, thank you very much, Hugh. Fascinating presentation. And I know there's so much more you can get into with all of this. But we thank you for being here and giving of your time. And we will see you some other time. Enjoy the rest of the conference with us.
Okay.
Thank you, Hugh.
All right.